If you were in just the previous session here, they stole all my ideas. So I'm excited about it. We're both talking about how to get students more engaged in, mine is in a particular class, but they did a consortium of classes or a group of classes. This is the other side of the coin of what we've been talking about a lot in this conference. We've been talking about, many of the things that I've taken away has been about exclusions and barriers to inclusion. And those are obviously central, but the work that I'm doing is on the other side. And that is figuring out, kind of poking students into participating. And I'm working on a book which is more aimed at society at large, but it's the question of not just how people can't get in, but why they are staying out. And the thing that got me started on at least this course stuff is that our class was encouraging that. So I'm from St. Edward's University, and at the time I was working in the adult program, which is terrific, and I think our audiences, our student bodies are similar here. They were all working adults. We met at night, and a lot of them, although it's a private school, a lot of them were lower socioeconomic, a lot of single parents working all day and all that. So asking that they become, involved in the sense of, say, service learning or so forth, just wasn't possible for me. So what I did was to develop a new model of the Capstone course. Everybody has to take Capstone to get out of there. And this is, kind of like senior thesis. And what I really hated was that it was canned and it was scholarly. Had very little to do with them as citizens emerging into the world. And so what I wanted to do was to help them develop agency. Instead of passively doing what we, on high scholars told them to do, I wanted them to, and learn isn't quite it because they were adults, but to further have an opportunity to develop citizenship skills. And the way that I thought about this and the way that I talk about it in my research is that it's not a list of activities, it's an attitude. And so for me, civic engagement is, I've got a lot of different ways of trying to put it, but it's recognizing our co-ownership of the commonwealth. It's about reclaiming our place in the public realm. And just a couple of examples to illustrate that. There were the Take Back the Night programs, and this was for violence, especially against women in tough neighborhoods. And people would march down with candles and say, "We're taking it back." And I love that idea because crime, you have had it, but these are our streets, and they're now ours. We are taking it back. We own these streets, we citizens. The other one is a famous book by Jane Jacobs, written in the 1950s. And she talks about well-functioning neighborhoods as being made up of people who keep eyes on the street. So that the well-functioning neighborhood, people know what's going on. Doesn't have to mean they're best friends, meaning each other's apartments, but they know what's going on and they're watching out for one another in a really organic, natural way. It's their neighborhood, it's their street. So what I wanted to do is to develop this sense of agency and sense of responsibility for the students, or again, help them develop or augment because they're adults, and to move us out of the private realm. I don't have a clicker for this. So briefly, the traditional Capstone drove me crazy. It was very formulaic. You had to write 20, 30 pages on a controversial moral issue, and these usually were things like the death penalty, like abortion and so forth. Very important. But my students weren't going to be on death row, I hoped. Or they're not going to be on the Supreme Court. I really hope they are, but they're not going to be having a real effect on these issues. Moreover, the way this was set up was really artificial in terms of our real experiences. It was yes or no. And you look at the arguments in favor of the death penalty and the arguments against the death penalty, and then you say one is right and the other one's wrong. Very unproductive. We have a very gray world. There are nuances, and we don't want it to be combative, Congress. We want this to be collaborative and figuring out solutions rather than just who wins. And part of what I noticed with the old one, I'm sorry, one more thing is all scholarly research. I'm all fit for it, but boring, and this is their doorway into society. They're not going to be, that isn't what's most relevant. We still have to do scholarly research, but it wasn't this passive piece of learning that was really us academics. That's our model, not theirs, not citizens. And so what I wanted them to do is to get a sense that they could have an effect on the community without, as I say, being on the Supreme Court. So I thought about local. They can actually see things happening locally. They can actually make things happen locally. So what they're, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to get something clarified. A controversial societal issue under the traditional model, the death penalty. Well, that's a messy social issue under the civic engagement model.
Oh, it is. Oh, it is.
So how does that?
Give me a second, I'll get to it.
Okay, I was wondering.
Absolutely. The way that it was phrased in the scholarly stuff, really, that's the dry part and that's the yes or no part. Absolutely. Messy as hell, but actually there's one answer that we have to live with. Is it constitutional or not? So very important stuff, just didn't want it for this piece, this course. So I wanted to place them in the local community, and here was their assignment. Come up with a way that you can add to the work of the community. Come up with a way that you can improve the community. So what I wanted here was to get a little bit beyond service learning. I wanted them to have to be creative. I wanted them to have to be take an active part in it. And so they were instructed to go out, and by the way, none of this, I didn't require them to actually do it because you can't with their schedules. So it was a proposal, and as I'll show you, it's a symposium that we have in the end. So it's a proposal, and I also allowed for them to do it online. So you can check out all the communities or all the organizations that are working on an issue. You can email, you can call, and so forth. So they had to come up with something more to do. And it didn't have to be big, but it had to be beyond what was going on. So some way to actually improve what's happening. And I'm talking mostly about the social issues here, but we had, various ones about beautification, public art. There was one that was surprisingly interesting. It was about dog poop not being picked up in dog parks and how she would get signs up to do this and educate. I didn't know it was going to be interesting. I kind of groaned when I saw that one, but it was actually very interesting. So there was a wide range of political, social, beautification, all that sort of stuff that they decided to do. Before they chose that, this is what we talked about in class. We talked about, and this again is, why are citizens staying out rather than why are we keeping them out? Both sides are really important, but I'm focusing on this one. And we talk about the civic deficit, and there's a whole school, Harry Boyd talks about the backyard revolution, there's a whole lot of stuff going on with this stuff. But as we've developed, and I blame the 90s for a lot, but we have turned into a very privatized sort of society. We have deserted the public public square. We are acting on individual kinds of motivations and so forth. Andrew Greene talks about cars as isolation chambers. So there we all are with our tinted windows, and then we can occasionally do that to each other, and it's the opposite of community. So we talk about that, and one of the things that I think has developed in this country is that our civic engagement is an opt-in system. So it's perfectly possible and easy and fine to not do anything. And it'd be great if we could turn it around to be an opt-out system so that you're expected to be in unless you opted out, but those are dreams. So lots of things wrong here. I'm going to keep going because, and this I'm happy to share, but the big one maybe here is that when we don't do anything, we are ceding power. We are saying to the oligarchies and to all the stuff that we hate, including Congress's behavior, okay, all set, yours. Now I'm not saying we can fix those easily, but I am saying that we can't say they're unfixable, because we've got to do something. And I spend a lot of time with this distinction between citizens and residents. If we're in the private realm, we're residents, we become consumers of public services. The more we don't work on our schools, for instance, or the more we take our kids out of public schools and put them in private ones, the less we are doing citizen work to create solutions. And the more we pay, and the less effective it is. Government will try to do what, well, we cede power, I'll just leave that. And these are just quotes from my work. I really want to get to something, as you can tell. But it loses its free labor. We lose civic vibrancy. So there's a real great organization, it's called the Better Block Organization. And what they do is they say, here's a really rundown, really neglected neighborhood. And for one weekend, we're going to all get together and fix this neighborhood as a community. I'm sorry, I've totally gone out of order here. But let me do a little bit of this.
So right now we're taking this block in Richmond, Virginia, and we're trying to make it more hospitable. What we found is the traditional planning process is a lot of drawings, a lot of discussion, it takes years to do. We found it's more important really to get out there on the streets now with the community and start doing things that can make the place more inviting today.
So we hired Team Better Block out of the Dallas area to come and consult us on how to do this. But all the people working are volunteers from Richmond. Today we're building parklets, which are sort of mini parks where usually cars would park on the street that become decks for existing businesses. We're also building furniture out of pallets that will go in those parks. Tomorrow we're going to start striping temporary bike lanes, crosswalks where the crosswalks have worn away or where they didn't exist before. But this is Richmond's first Better Block project, and I'm hoping that we're going to see a lot more after
Was a great opportunity to bring the community out to get engaged. Sometimes it's really difficult to see when you just see a vacant property that's been sitting for a while. But Better Block allows you to see that very concretely, what it can be.
What Better Block did for me is to help me learn a little bit more about the building process of what I needed to do to get the business up and running. So I really enjoyed it.
There's a lot of areas of Richmond that I think would benefit from a Better Block project. Just because this event ends this weekend doesn't mean that the improvements and the love has to go away. And I hope people just really learn to love this area.
That's perfect instance of reclaiming the public square, reclaiming the public realm. And ownership, where am I? I'm sorry. Here we go. Ownership of one's community, okay? And the thing is, those were actions, but I really want to emphasize that civic engagement is the recognition of that ownership. And I've struggled with this term because it's, you know, capitalistic ownership, but it is our community. The other way that Jane Jacobs put it, and I'd really like to steal it, but it's so central I can't. We are the natural proprietors of our public realm. And that is when we go inside, as it were, we ignore that. And we ignore the responsibilities that go with it. I don't know if you're familiar with the broken window syndrome, but that is if you have a neighborhood which has one broken window or one beat up car, and by the way, this happens in rich neighborhoods as well as poor ones. If you don't fix that first thing, it'll keep going. You'll get more broken windows and more beat up cars. But if you fix the broken window, whether it's yours or not, you're taking ownership, or you're recognizing that these are your streets, that this is something that matters to you. It can be very self-interested. And it's about the sort of connectedness that we saw in the previous, that great video that you showed about empathy. This is all, I'm very open to whatever they want to do. It's about connectedness to one another in the class, to the community, and to the actual issues that matter in our society. By the way, with the teaching, our school offers a nice thing, and that is, if you try something new, we won't look at your evaluations that semester if they're bad. And that's really, really important.
That's a wonderful idea.
It's fair. My students hated this the first time I ran it. Think about how nice. We actually had a Capstone handbook, and it said, identify the stakeholders. Consider the assumptions. Well, if you need to be told to identify the stakeholders in a paper, I don't think you got the idea, right? The paper's about stakeholders. So it was very formulaic, and that was reputation around school, and that, you know, wasn't all that interesting, but you could get through it. There was the handbook, it told you step by step. Then I blast in there and I say, don't know what you're going to be doing, but here it is. Huge amounts of unease, huge fear of being unguided, and real anxiety, especially on the part of some of my adult students who are really hyper-responsible, very much anxiety about, but what do you want? Whatever you want to do. I mean, I have assignments and they're all up here, and it worked out that way as well. But I was putting it on them to decide how they would impact their neighborhood. And the idea that they can pick something that's already of interest to them, or something new, it doesn't matter, and they can hook onto the organizations that are already working. The idea was definitely work with the homeless. We have an Austin Resource Center for the homeless. But then imagine yourself as in charge of that and say, we want to better our program. Just a little bit. So you had to write up, and in great detail, a way to take it up a next step. And again, it was just in terms of the proposal that they had to do. But it was, as you'll see, it was really, really detailed. It had to be feasible. So I really love this. This was on campus. We have this organization called Leadership. And I love this. This is your world, shape it, or somebody else will. And that's what happens when we lose ownership of, or forget our ownership of the public realm. We've been talking a lot about the influence of money, and I don't deny that at all. But the other side of it is, so you're going to accept it? So this idea was to go on from there. So I want to show you, sorry, let's say one more thing. They went through all these assignments. They did field research, they did scholarly research, then they had to synthesize the two, so it was still about being, it was college work, but integrated with the community. And then we thought one of the drawbacks with the old one, old Capstone, was the deadly class presentations, which I loved your idea of the poster sessions. We met from 3:30 to 10:15 at night, and I'd have, say, 15 people and students, and we'd do 15 presentations on the work. And boy, poor 15. I was having a hard time with it. And they were very dry because that was what they had been doing. So scholarly research says this, and so forth. So I wanted to get around that and came up, luckily with the support of my department, of my school, came up with an idea of having a civic engagement symposium. And so I wanted it to be like a conference. I wanted to make this more important. The other thing about these scholarly things is that they have an audience of one, me. So they work so hard, and then one person is going to read that paper. And their fellow classmates will hear the presentation, and that's it. So that seemed not fair. They should have more. So we came up with this idea of a symposium, and we made it really as sort of professional as possible. That's not a great picture, but the idea is we had it on a Saturday, and I love the bottom part, which I can barely read, but it says, please join us as we showcase our graduates' work in keeping with the Holy Cross tradition and St. Edward's mission statement. These students leave our university educated in heart and mind, ready to seek greater social justice and respect for all individuals. Heart and mind. That was what I wanted them. And so we made it, we had a continental breakfast, and again, I was lucky to get the funds. But, and it was on a Saturday, and it was in, you know, a nice building and so forth like this. And the audience was your family, your friends, other students which were going to take the course. Practically my whole faculty showed up on a Saturday. The advisors and staff. And so it was something like this, which felt so important to the students. Again, some of them just hated me. They didn't want, and word out in the street was, I'd do it except for the symposium. They really didn't want to do this. And then to the student, afterwards, they were so high on it. They were so glad they did it. So torture's good sometimes. So it was really a celebration of the end of their career, and it was a celebration of their work. And I told them, I don't want a lot of, well, you can do whatever you want, but I don't need a lot of graphs, and I don't need, unless they're pithy, I don't need a lot of listing of scholarly work. I want you to make it exciting. I want you to make it provocative. I want you to make it interesting. Let someone who is outside of Capstone, outside of the academy, know why this matters to you. So here is a PowerPoint of the, I hate this when people can see me up here wondering what I'm doing. There's a story why it's 2013. just hitting the, what do I do, what do I do? Huh?
Mhm.
Couple of logistics there, because Carly and Lisa were talking about how do you pull this off with huge workloads and so forth. I didn't have to contact one organization. It was so great because I thought I'd be calling in people and so forth. They went and took it on their own, partly because I pushed them over the cliff. And a lot of stuff could be done, so much was done online because they're busy and so forth. There were some that took it further and some that continued afterwards. So I did have one student, a young man, who went dumpster diving to see what you could get, and had great photos of what you can get from dumpsters. I had a woman who figured out what minimum wage, one wage earner in a family of 4 would make, and she fed her family on that for a week and showed us what that was. I had someone working with pit bulls as therapy dogs, and she brought the pit bulls to the session and so forth. But the great thing was they went out and got it themselves. And I have never seen so much peer interaction and help. When we would go through in class and say, what's everybody working on and so forth, they would be, oh, I have a sister-in-law that's working on that, and here, and they traded numbers and so forth. So it was unbelievable collaboration on their part. All the stuff you saw here were fancy PowerPoints. It's like the poster session. I couldn't get them to do these things, although some of them did, but I wanted them to think it through at a level that made it feasible, concrete, actual in some way, so that they could get a sense of having real efficacy, real agency in the community. And it was so that, you know, with the symposium, one of the things that I remember is I went and I got pitchers of water and I put glasses out for each of the presenters. That just gave them such a feeling of, you know, this is important. So there are the assignments, and it goes through it, and kind of boring, but fine. But I want to leave us with a couple of, this is the one I like, Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. When the Athenians finally wanted not to give to society, but for society to give to them, and the freedom they wished for most was the freedom from responsibility, then Athens ceased to be free. So it was exiting the private realm onto the public stage, and I have had many people get back to me that this is still going on in a lot of places. Thank you.